The Silverwood Elite Range rose from Wyoming's frost-dusted plains like a monument to precision and power. Its steel gates gleamed under the winter sun, razor wire crowning the perimeter like a metallic warning to anyone who didn't belong. This wasn't just a shooting range, it was a cathedral where legends were forged and dreams were shattered with mathematical precision. Clara Reed sat in her battered pickup truck outside those imposing gates, her breath fogging in the December air. At 31, she carried herself with the quiet discipline of someone who'd learned to speak through actions rather than words. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and her hazel eyes held depths that most people never bothered to look into. She wore a scorched grey hoodie, a memento from her last deployment that she couldn't bring herself to throw away, and faded jeans that had seen better decades. In the passenger seat lay her companion, an M1 Garand with a cracked, wooden stock and paint that had been worn thin by countless hours of use. Most people saw junk. Clara saw history, precision, and the ghost of her father's steady hands teaching her to breathe between heartbeats. Today was the Maximum Trajectory exhibition, an invitation-only spectacle where the world's elite shooters attempted the legendary 1,000-meter challenge, 10 shots, 10 bullseyes, each scored to a perfect 10.0. Since 2012, no one had surpassed Charlotte Wild's record, 9 perfect 10s and a single 9.9, a mark so close to perfection it haunted every shooter who stepped onto the firing line. As Clara approached the gate, she could see them through the chain link, generals with chests full of ribbons, national champions signing autographs, and corporate sponsors from Lockheed and Raytheon examining rifles that cost more than most people's cars. Matte black Humvees and polished Range Rovers filled the parking area like a display of power and wealth. The security guard was a mountain of a man squeezed into tactical gear, his name tag reading Davidson. He looked Clara up and down with the kind of smirk that suggested he'd already written her story. And it wasn't flattering. "This event's invitation only," Davidson said, his voice thick with condescension. His radio crackled at his hip as his eyes lingered on her hoodie's burn marks. "Public range is 30 miles east, better suited for—" He gestured vaguely at her rifle, letting his silence finish the insult. Clara's hazel eyes met his without blinking. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded waiver, its creases worn from her nervous handling over the past week. BBT document was signed and stamped, granting open participation under the exhibition's rarely used public clause, a legal loophole that most people didn't know existed. Davidson's smirk faltered as he scanned the paper. His fingers tightened on the waiver as his scowl deepened with each official line. "I've got a situation," he muttered into his radio, his tone laced with mockery. His eyes flicked back to Clara's scorched hoodie. Attire's non-compliant, and she's carrying some relic from a war nobody remembers. A voice crackled back through the static, sharp with amusement. "Let her in. She'll crash and burn in 10 minutes. Might even make good entertainment." The gate buzzed open with a mechanical groan. Clara stepped through, her boots crunching on the gravel, her rifle slung across her shoulder like a quiet promise. Behind her, Davidson watched with anticipation, already building for the story he'd tell his buddies later about the nobody who thought she could shoot with the elite. What none of them knew, what the classified files had buried 12 years ago, was that Clara Reed wasn't just any shooter. She was the daughter of James Reed, the legendary sniper who'd been blacklisted and erased from military records after a mission that officially never happened. The skills that had made him a ghost in the service had been passed down through countless hours of patient training in abandoned quarries and forgotten ranges. As Clara walked toward the registration table, her scarred wrist caught the winter light, a thin, pale line that marked her own service, her own battles, her own reasons for needing to prove that some things couldn't be bought, only earned. The elite might have their technology, their sponsors, and their arrogance, but Clara had something they'd never understand, the quiet fury of someone who'd been underestimated her entire life, and a rifle that had been waiting 12 years for this moment. The real show was about to begin. The gauntlet of scorn, the range stretched out like a battlefield of precision, its lanes numbered and measured to exacting standards. Clara walked among shooters who wore their success like armor, carbon fiber vests emblazoned with sponsor logos, custom patches declaring championships, and expressions that suggested they owned the very air they breathed. She was assigned lane 7, a number that felt prophetic in ways she couldn't explain. As she unpacked her ammunition, simple military surplus rounds that cost a fraction of the custom load surrounding her, a range official in a crisp Silverwood jacket approached. His clipboard was clutched like a weapon, and his presence radiated, the kind of authority that demanded immediate submission. "Clara Reed," he announced, his voice booming across nearby lanes and drawing attention from shooters and overhead drones alike. This is a mistake. His words were calculated to carry, to establish dominance before witnesses. Open participation doesn't mean riff-raff with scrap metal can waltz in here. That rifle's a safety hazard, barely competition legal. Every word was a public flogging designed to make Clara retreat in shame. Nearby shooters smirked behind their high-tech equipment, while a camera drone swiveled to broadcast her humiliation to the live streams that were already attracting thousands of viewers. "Step aside until we verify your waiver," the official demanded, his tone suggesting she'd forged the document. His eyes narrowed as they took in her scorched hoodie, her unbranded boots, her complete lack of corporate sponsorship. Clara's fingers paused on a cartridge, her hazel eyes meeting his with steady resolve. But she didn't speak. Her silence was a shield against his authority, a refusal to play his game of public degradation. The official turned to address the growing crowd of onlookers. "Some people don't know their place," he said loudly, ensuring his words carried to the observation deck, where journalists scribbled notes and sponsors nodded approvingly. The laughter that followed was sharp as winter wind, cutting through the thin mountain air. Clara's legitimacy was being mocked before she'd even fired a shot, her right to compete questioned by people who'd never earned their positions through anything more challenging than writing checks. On the observation deck, a social media influencer with 1 million followers held up her phone, its glittery case catching the light as she angled it toward Clara's lane. "Y'all, look at this," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured outrage. "Some random thinks she's a shooter with a rifle my grandpa would have scrapped. Bet she's here for clout, not skill." Her followers flooded the chat with laughing emojis, turning Clara's presence into viral content. The comments became a barrage of insults, each one a digital stone thrown at someone who'd committed the crime of existing in a space where she wasn't wanted. But there were other eyes watching too. In the back of the observation deck, a military correspondent with a frayed press badge leaned forward, something familiar nagging at his memory. Clara Reed. The name stirred echoes of classified briefings and redacted files, of stories that had been buried so deep that most people forgot they'd ever existed. As Clara knelt beside her sandbag, adjusting her rifle with movements that spoke Of muscle memory carved through years of practice, her hoodie shifted slightly. For just a moment, a thin scar became visible on her wrist, a pale line that caught the correspondent's trained eye. It was the kind of mark left by shrapnel, the kind of souvenir that came from places where bullets flew with deadly intent. The correspondent's notebook began to shake in his hands as fragments of memory assembled into recognition. James Reed, the ghost sniper from Operation Blackwater, the man who'd vanished from all official records after a mission that had never officially happened. The legend who'd trained his daughter to shoot before she could properly hold a rifle. Clara's silence suddenly took on new meaning. This wasn't submission or fear. This was the quiet confidence of someone who'd learned that words were often meaningless, but actions echoed forever. The crowd's mockery continued, but something had shifted. The correspondent whispered urgently to his colleague. Phones began recording with different intent, and the very air seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of what was coming. Clara chambered her first round, the Garand's distinctive ping, cutting through the noise like a bell, tolling the beginning of something extraordinary. The weight of legacy, the mockery escalated as Clara prepared for her first shot. Charlotte Wilde, the reigning champion whose record had stood untouched for 12 years, stood near the registration table signing autographs with practiced ease. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect ponytail, and her custom Anschutz rifle gleamed beside her like a monument to precision engineering. Charlotte's blue eyes found Clara across the range, and her voice carried clearly over the crowd's hum. "A Garand? That antique belongs in a museum, not here." She paused her autograph signing for effect, ensuring every phone and camera captured her dismissal. Or maybe a junkyard? The crowd around. Charlotte erupted in laughter, their phones raised to immortalize the moment. Within minutes, hashtags like "Your Garand Girl" and "Gas Range Amateur" were trending, turning Clara's presence into a national joke. A group of shooters wearing Raytheon badges gathered near Clara's lane, their rifles fitted with digital scopes that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Their voices were pitched to carry, ensuring their commentary reached the live streams. "Look at that rifle," one said, a man in his 40s with the soft edges of corporate comfort. "She's more likely to shoot her own foot than hit 1,000 meters." Retired colonel with a silver moustache and a chest full of ribbons chuckled, his breath visible in the cold air. "Bet it jams before the first shot." What's she thinking, bringing that antique here? Clara didn't look up. Her hands continued their methodical preparation, fingers tracing the Garand's worn leather sling with the kind of reverence usually reserved for sacred objects. Every scratch and dent on that rifle told a story, stories of her father's service, of late nights learning to read wind patterns, of understanding that precision came from the shooter, not the scope. The humiliation deepened when a tech crew approached to calibrate the lane's digital systems. The lead technician, a wiry man with a Lockheed patch, stopped short when he saw Clara's setup. "You're not on our tech support list," he said, his tablet held like a shield between them. "No aids for open participants, but you don't even have a scope. You sure you're in the right place?" His crew laughed, their voices carrying to the observation deck, where sponsors and journalists leaned forward with their binoculars, not to witness skill, but to capture the spectacle of failure. A camera drone hovered closer, its lens zooming in on Clara's scorched hoodie, broadcasting her solitude to thousands of online viewers. But the cruelest blow came from an unexpected source. A spectator with a VIP badge, a man whose own shooting career had ended in mediocrity decades ago, shouted from the deck with vicious intent, "Hey, Reed."
"Is that your daddy's rifle? The one he got blacklisted with?" The words hit like physical blows. Clara's fingers tightened on the Garand's sling, her knuckles going white as the crowd's laughter took on a sharper edge. The attack on her father's
memory was calculated cruelty, designed to break her concentration and strip away the last of her dignity.
"No wonder you're here with trash," the man continued, feeding off the crowd's energy. "You're just like him, a disappointment." What the crowd didn't know, what had been buried in classified files and redacted reports, was that James Reed hadn't been blacklisted for failure.
He'd been erased because he'd been too successful, because his methods had been too effective, because his daughter had inherited skills that made governments nervous. The military correspondent in the back row felt the pieces clicking together. His whispered urgency to his colleague carried a name that made both journalists freeze. That's Clara Reed, daughter of Ghost 6, the sniper who never missed. Clara's hazel eyes remained fixed on the distant target, a speck against the snow-capped
mountains.
Her breathing was controlled, methodical, each inhale and exhale a meditation that separated her from the noise, the cruelty, the weight of expectations and assumptions. Her scar itched in the cold, a reminder of her own service, her own sacrifices, her own reasons for being here. This wasn't about proving herself to these people. This was about reclaiming something that had been stolen from her family, about showing the world that some legacies couldn't be buried by bureaucrats and cowards. As she settled into her shooting position, Clara's silence took on the quality of gathering thunder. The crowd might see a woman with a broken rifle and burned clothes, but they were about to discover what 12 years of patient training had created. The range master's voice crackled over the intercom. "Lane 7, Clara."
"Reed, 10 shots, 1,000 meters."
"Begin when ready." The real reckoning was about to begin. The breaking point, the final insult came just as Clara prepared to fire. An event organizer in a pristine Silverwood blazer stormed across the range, his face red with manufactured indignation. His timing was calculated. He'd waited for maximum visibility, ensuring every camera and smartphone would capture what he intended to be Clara's final humiliation. "Reed," he barked, his voice echoing across the firing lanes. "You're not cleared. Your waiver's under review. Suspected irregularity. Step off the platform immediately." The accusation was designed to destroy her. By questioning the validity of her paperwork, in front of hundreds of witnesses and thousands of online viewers, he was essentially calling her a fraud. The implication hung in the air like poison. She'd forged documents to gain access to an event where she didn't belong. "This isn't a game for amateurs with junk rifles," he continued, pointing at her Garand with theatrical disgust. "You're delaying our schedule. Move!" The crowd murmured with approval, sponsors nodding as if witnessing justice being served. Camera drones captured every angle of the confrontation, their lenses zooming in on Clara's scorched hoodie and weather-beaten boots. The live streams exploded with comments celebrating what looked like the end of her brief, embarrassing appearance. Clara stood motionless, her hazel eyes meeting the organizers with steady defiance. Her fingers remained firm on her rifle, her posture unchanged by his theatrical fury. But inside, something fundamental was shifting, not breaking, but crystallizing into diamond-hard resolve. The organizer pressed his advantage, sensing weakness in her silence. "You're a disgrace to Silverwood," he declared, loudly enough for the observation deck to hear. "This range has standards." That's when the rangemaster's voice cut through the chaos from the control booth, his words broadcast clearly over the intercom. "The waiver has been verified and approved. Lane 7 is cleared to proceed." The organizer's face went pale, his theatrical confidence crumbling as his power play backfired publicly. The crowd's murmur shifted from approval to uncertainty, phones continuing to record what was becoming a different kind of spectacle. "She's still not," the organizer began, but Clara finally spoke. "I didn't come here for your permission," she said, quietly, her voice carrying despite its soft tone. Every word was measured, controlled, deadly in its precision. "I came here to take back what you laughed at." The crowd fell silent. There was something in her tone, not anger, not pleading, but the kind of certainty that came from someone who'd already decided how this story would end. Clara knelt beside her sandbag, her movements deliberate and final. As she adjusted her rifle, her hoodie shifted, revealing not just the scar on her wrist, but something else the cameras caught, a small tattoo on her shoulder blade, 3 numbers and a symbol that made the military correspondent's blood run cold. "Unit 77, he whispered to his colleague, his notebook trembling. "Special Operations, the classified unit that officially never existed." But Clara was beyond their recognition now, beyond their categories and assumptions. She'd found that place inside herself where noise became silence, where mockery became motivation, where the weight of her father's ghost settled onto her shoulders like a familiar coat. The organizer retreated, muttering threats about reviews and investigations, but his words were already meaningless. The crowd's attention had shifted from expectation of failure to something else, a growing awareness that they might be witnessing something unprecedented. Charlotte Wilde stood frozen by her autograph table, her custom rifle suddenly looking like expensive decoration. For the first time in years, doubt flickered in her champion's confidence. There was something about Clara's stillness, her complete indifference to the chaos around her, that suggested capabilities hidden beneath the surface. Clara chambered her first round, the Garand's distinctive ping cutting through the mountain air like a promise. Her breathing slowed, her heartbeat steadied, and the distant target became the only thing that existed in her universe. The breaking point hadn't broken her, it had freed her. Now they would see what a ghost could do. The first thunder, the first shot shattered more than the morning silence. The Garand's sharp crack rolled across the plains like thunder, its sound older and rawer than the whisper-quiet reports of the high-tech rifles surrounding it. The echo bounced off the mountains and returned like an omen. The scoreboard flashed, 10 perfect bullseye. The crowd's reaction was a ripple of disbelief disguised as amusement. They chuckled nervously, unwilling to abandon their certainty so quickly. "Lucky shot," the retired colonel muttered, his moustache twitching as he adjusted his binoculars. "Won't happen again." Clara didn't react. Her hazel eyes remained locked on the target, her hands steady as she chambered the second round. The Garand's metallic ping seemed to cut through their confidence like a blade through silk. The second shot, 10.0, the laughter faltered. Murmurs of unease crept into the observation deck like shadows at sunset. Phones lowered slightly, binoculars rose, and the crowd's comfortable certainty began to crack around the edges. Third shot, 10.0. Fourth shot, 10.0. The range grew still. The casual conversations died. Even the drones seemed to hover more intently, their cameras focused with new purpose on the woman in the scorched hoodie who was doing the impossible with a rifle older than most of the spectators. "She's not adjusting." "For wind," a Raytheon engineer whispered to his colleague, his expensive wind meter forgotten in his trembling hand. His tablet blinked uselessly with atmospheric data that Clara apparently didn't need. How is she hitting like that? Charlotte Wilde paused mid-autograph, her pen hovering over someone's program as her blue eyes fixed on the scoreboard. Her perfect smile had vanished, replaced by something that looked dangerously close to fear. Fifth shot, 10.0. The murmurs sharpened, edged with confusion and growing respect. A retired sniper in the crowd, a man whose own service record was impressive enough to command respect, leaned toward his companion. "She's not just shooting," he said, his voice low but urgent with recognition. "She's reading the wind with her eyes. No instruments, no calculations. She's feeling the air itself." His words carried to nearby journalists who began scribbling frantically. The live streams were exploding with viewers, hashtags shifting from mockery to amazement. Garand Girl was taking on new meaning, becoming a rallying cry rather than an insult. Clara's technique was flawless poetry. Each movement was economy itself, no wasted motion, no unnecessary adjustment. Her grip remained constant, her breathing a metronome that measured out perfection in mechanical increments. The Garand's iron sights were her only guide, but her eyes held the accumulated wisdom of 1,000 hours of training, with a father who'd understood that true precision came from within. Sixth shot, 10.0. The range had become a cathedral of anticipation. Camera drones circled like mechanical vultures, capturing every angle of what was becoming historic. The crowd's earlier mockery seemed not just wrong, but blasphemous. They'd been laughing at something they couldn't understand, dismissing mastery they couldn't recognize. Seventh shot, 10.0. Silence descended like a blessing. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Charlotte's pen had fallen to her table, her jaw clenched as she watched her 12-year record dissolving before her eyes. Eighth shot, 10.0. The military correspondent found his voice, his whisper, carrying across the suddenly quiet deck. "That's Clara Reed, daughter of James Reed, Ghost 6. The sniper who dropped 6 targets at 1,200 meters in under 60 seconds and then vanished from all official records." His colleague's tablet slipped from her hands, clattering to the deck. Around them, understanding began to dawn on faces that had been confident in their superiority just minutes before. Clara remained focused, her concentration unbroken by the revelation of her identity. She was somewhere else now, in that place her father had taught her to find, where time slowed and space compressed, until there was nothing but breath, heartbeat, and the perfect alignment of will and physics. Ninth shot, 10-0. The scoreboard burned with impossible precision. 9 perfect 10s, 1 shot remaining. Charlotte Wild's 2012 record, 9 10s, and a 9.9 was already shattered, but Clara wasn't shooting for records. She was shooting for something deeper, vindication, legacy, and the quiet satisfaction of proving that some things couldn't be bought or faked. The crowd held its collective breath. Phones recorded frantically. The observation deck was chaos. Sponsors huddling in urgent conversations, generals exchanging glances that suggested paradigms were shifting, journalists rewriting stories they thought they understood. Clara chambered her final round, the Garand's ping now familiar as a battle hymn. Her movements were as steady as they'd been for the first shot, unchanged by pressure or expectations, or the weight of history gathering around her shoulders. The wind stilled, the mountains watched, the plains stretched out like witnesses to judgment. 1 shot remained between Clara Reed and immortality. The thunder's echo, the 10th shot, was inevitability made manifest. Clara's exhale was controlled, steady. Not the desperate gasp of someone under pressure, but the measured breath of someone who'd found perfect stillness within chaos. Her body had become a machine of precision, her mind a vault where doubt couldn't enter. The Garand kicked against her shoulder one final time. Its crack split the air like judgment, the bullet streaking across 1,000 meters of Wyoming wind to find its mark with surgical certainty. The scoreboard flashed 10.010 shots, 10 perfect tens, a new national record, Charlotte Wild's 12-yearly. Rain ended not with ceremony but with the simple mathematics of superiority. The range erupted, not in cheers, but in gasps and whispers that built into a tidal wave of disbelief. The camera drones captured it all. Clara's unmoved expression, her scorched hoodie, now a banner of victory, her chipped Garand transformed from junk into legend. The observation deck was chaos, sponsors abandoning their comfortable assumptions, generals shifting uncomfortably as their world realigned, live streamers scrambling to rewrite captions that had started as mockery. Garand. Girl breaks record flashed across screens worldwide. The hashtag exploded into viral territory, carrying Clara's story to millions who understood what it meant to be underestimated and dismissed. The military correspondent was typing furiously, his headline already forming, "Ghost Sniper Returns. Daughter of blacklisted legend obliterates national record with the W-2A rifle." Clara stood slowly, slinging the Garand over her shoulder with the same quiet respect she'd shown all morning. Its cracked stock caught the winter sun, its worn barrel still warm from the shots that had rewritten history. She didn't look at the scoreboard, didn't need to. The crowd's silence told her everything. Charlotte pushed through the gathering throng, her face pale with the shock of sudden mortality. Her blue eyes, which had held championship confidence for over a decade, now carried the bewildered fear of someone whose world had just been redefined by forces beyond her understanding.
That was incredible, Charlotte managed, extending a trembling hand. Her voice was unsteady, her champion's composure cracking like ice in spring. Congratulations. Clara's hazel eyes met hers, sharp, unyielding, holding the weight of every laugh, every
sneer, every moment of mockery that had preceded this reckoning. She didn't take the offered hand. "I didn't come here for your record," Clara said quietly, each word precise as her shooting. "I came to take back what you laughed at, my pride, my father's memory, my right to exist in your world." She turned away, her boots crunching on gravel that had witnessed the fall of certainty. The crowd parted before her like water, their whispers trailing in her wake. Phones still recorded, but Clara no longer looked back. Her silence had become her victory, her rifle, her vindication, her precision, her proof. The aftermath was swift and merciless. Sponsors huddled in urgent conversations, their investments in high-tech equipment suddenly questionable. The shooters stared at their digital scopes and custom ammunition as if seeing toys for the first time. Charlotte's autograph table was abandoned, her reign reduced to historical footnote in the span of 10 shots. The range official who'd questioned Clara's eligibility approached the rangemaster, his clipboard trembling in hands that had been steady with authority just an hour before. "I may have misjudged her qualifications," he stammered, his voice barely audible over the crowd's buzzing. The rangemaster's response was ice. "Your oversight has been noted. Expect a formal review of your position." The official's face went pale. His public humiliation of Clara had become a career-ending mistake, broadcast live to thousands who'd witnessed his arrogance crumble before demonstrable skill. The social media influencer who'd mocked Clara with cruel hashtags found her own stream, backfiring spectacularly. Her followers turned against her, flooding her comments with demands for apologies and praise for the woman she'd tried to destroy. Her sponsors sent messages threatening to drop her for poor judgment in attacking someone who'd just become a national sensation. Clara reached her truck, a battered pickup that matched her rifle's honest wear. She placed the Garand in the passenger seat like a trusted friend, its mission complete, its honor restored. The crowd was still gathering at the range, still processing what they'd witnessed, but Clara was already elsewhere in her mind. She'd come for herself, for her father, for every shot that had been erased from history, every record that had been buried in classified files. The Silverwood Elite Range would never be the same. Its gates could no longer keep out the woman who'd walked in with nothing but a waiver and walked out with everything. As Clara drove away into the Wyoming plains, the mountains stood as silent witnesses to what had just occurred. Her hoodie remained scorched, her rifle remained chipped, but her name would now burn forever in the record books and in the memory of everyone who'd learned that day that true precision couldn't be purchased, only earned through blood, discipline, and the quiet fury of someone who refused to be dismissed. The live streams would replay her shots for years. Social media would immortalize her legend. But Clara drove toward the horizon in comfortable silence, her work complete, her father's ghost finally at rest. The reckoning spreads. The shockwaves from Clara's performance rippled outward like concentric circles from a stone dropped in still water. Within hours, the footage had spread across every platform, every network, every corner of the internet where people gathered to witness the impossible made real. The Silverwood Elite Range, which had operated for decades as a fortress of exclusivity, found itself under microscopic scrutiny. Social media investigators had dug up years of discriminatory practices, documented instances of qualified shooters being turned away for failing to meet unwritten codes of wealth and status. The hashtag #ToOpenTheGates the gates was trending alongside #GarandGirl as people demanded accountability from institutions that had confused exclusivity with excellence. Corporate sponsors were in full damage control mode. Raytheon and Lockheed found their expensive equipment upstaged by a rifle that cost less than most people's monthly car payments. Their marketing departments worked frantically to spin the narrative, but the math was inescapable. Clara had outperformed millions of dollars in technology with skill, discipline, and hardware from 1943. Charlotte Wild's world collapsed with stunning speed. Her sponsors began reviewing their partnerships, a polite way of saying they were running from association with someone who'd been exposed as both cruel and inferior. Her social media accounts, once filled with adoring fans, became battlegrounds where people dissected every moment of her mockery of Clara. The most damaging footage was a compilation someone had created. Charlotte's sneering dismissal of Clara's antique rifle, followed immediately by the scoreboard showing 10 perfect shots. The video had been viewed 50 million times in 12 hours, becoming a masterclass in the dangers of premature judgment. But the deepest investigations were being conducted by journalists who'd recognized the significance of Clara's last name. The military correspondent who'd first identified her was leading a team that had spent the night diving into declassified documents, FOIA requests, and the digital breadcrumbs left by operations that had officially never existed. What they found painted a picture of systematic suppression. James Reed hadn't been blacklisted for failure, he'd been erased because his success had become inconvenient. His methods had been too effective, his questions too uncomfortable, his daughter's inherited abilities too threatening to people who preferred their heroes manageable and their legends controllable. The correspondent's article, published at dawn, was titled "The Ghost they couldn't bury: how Clara Reed reclaimed her father's legacy. It detailed not just the shooting exhibition, but the decades-long effort to erase the Reed family from military history. Within hours, it had been picked up by major networks, sparking calls for congressional investigations into military cover-ups and the systemic suppression of inconvenient truths. At Silverwood, the aftermath was swift and brutal. The range official who'd publicly humiliated Clara found his termination letter waiting Monday morning, along with a lawsuit from Clara's newly acquired legal team, civil rights attorneys who specialized in discrimination cases and who were salivating at the chance to take on such a high-profile instance of institutional bias. The security guard who'd smirked at Clara's arrival discovered that his moment of viral fame had cost him his job. The footage of his condescending treatment of a woman who'd just become a national hero was career suicide in the age of social media accountability. Most satisfying of all was the fate of the social media influencer who tried to turn Clara into content for her cruel entertainment. Her follower count had plummeted as people discovered her pattern of bullying behavior. Her sponsors fled like rats from a sinking ship, and her carefully constructed brand crumbled under the weight of her own documented cruelty. The event organizer who tried to disqualify Clara found himself facing not just unemployment, but professional blacklisting. No legitimate shooting organization would touch someone who'd so publicly revealed their bias and incompetence. Meanwhile, Clara's phone, which she'd kept on silent during the drive home, buzzed constantly with calls from reporters, sponsors, and shooting organizations who suddenly wanted to associate themselves with her legend. She let them all go to voicemail. The time for their recognition had passed. Instead, she spent the evening in her workshop, cleaning the garand with the same methodical care her father had taught her decades ago. Each part was inspected, each surface lovingly maintained. The rifle had served faithfully, and it deserved the respect that its performance had earned. Outside, news vans had begun gathering on the road leading to her small ranch. Reporters camped in the cold, hoping for interviews, statements, any crumb of access to the woman who'd become America's most unlikely folk hero. But Clara's silence remained absolute. She'd said what she needed to say with 10 shots and a scoreboard that would stand as testimony long after the noise faded. The world could chase her story, dissect her performance, and debate her methods, but they'd already heard everything she had to tell them. The ghost had returned, proven her point, and vanished again into the Wyoming plains where legends were, born in silence and proved themselves through actions that spoke louder than any words ever could. The legend lives in silence. 3 months after the Silverwood exhibition, Clara Reed had become something she'd never sought, a symbol. Her image, the scorched hoodie, the weathered garand, the steady hazel eyes that had stared down an empire of arrogance, adorned everything from T-shirts to motivational posters. The phrase, "let your work speak," had become a rallying cry for anyone who'd ever been underestimated. But Clara herself remained invisible. She'd turned down every interview request, every sponsorship offer, every invitation to appear at shooting events or television shows. Hollywood agents called with movie deals. Publishers offered 7-figure advances for her autobiography. Corporate executives promised endorsement contracts worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. All of them received the same response: silence. The Silverwood elite range had been forced to implement sweeping changes. New ownership had taken over after the previous management was sued into bankruptcy by discrimination lawsuits that multiplied like wildfire. The open participation clause that Clara had used was now prominently featured in their advertising, and they'd established a scholarship fund for shooters who couldn't afford the premium fees. Charlotte Wilde had disappeared from public view entirely. Her records had been erased not by officials, but by irrelevance. When someone shoots a perfect score, previous achievements become footnotes. She'd lost her sponsors, her celebrity status, and most painfully, her identity as a champion. The woman who'd built her life on being the best discovered what happened when someone better came along. The congressional investigation sparked by the journalist's exposé had uncovered decades of military cover-ups. James Reed's service record was declassified and restored, revealing a career of extraordinary achievement that had been buried by bureaucrats who'd preferred comfortable lies to uncomfortable heroes. A memorial was planned in his honor, though Clara had already declined to attend the ceremony. The military correspondent who'd first recognized her name received a Pulitzer Prize for his investigation into the systematic erasure of inconvenient heroes. In his acceptance speech, he dedicated the award to the ghosts who served in silence and the daughter who proved their legacy couldn't be buried. But perhaps the most significant change was cultural. The Silverwood exhibition had been shared so widely that it became a template for recognizing hidden excellence. Remember, the Garand girl became shorthand for looking beyond surface appearances, for questioning assumptions about worth and capability. Shooting ranges across the country reported increased participation from people who'd previously felt excluded. Women, minorities, and anyone whose equipment looked wrong to traditional eyes found new respect in communities that had learned the cost of dismissing quiet competence. Clara's truck still sat in the driveway of her small ranch, but she'd stopped, answering the door when reporters came calling. Her workshop light burned late into many nights, the sound of careful maintenance drifting across the plains. The Garand rested in a place of honor, its mission complete, but its readiness maintained. On quiet evenings, she'd sit on her porch with a cup of coffee, watching the same mountains that had witnessed her father's training sessions decades earlier. Sometimes she'd catch the glint of telephoto lenses from the road, photographers still hoping to capture the woman who'd become legend. But Clara had mastered the art of invisible existence, moving through her own life like the ghost her father had taught her to be. The scar on her wrist had faded over the months, but the deeper marks, the ones left by a lifetime of being underestimated, had been healed by 10 perfect shots and a scoreboard that couldn't lie. She'd taken back more than a record that day at Silverwood. She'd reclaimed her right to exist on her own terms, in her own silence, judged by her own standards. The world could keep its noise, its celebrity, its desperate hunger for her story. Clara had already told it in the only language that mattered: precision, discipline, and the kind of quiet excellence that spoke louder than any interview ever could. Late at night, when the wind was right, you could sometimes hear the echo of that day. 10 shots that had changed everything, fired by a woman in a scorched hoodie who'd walked into a fortress of arrogance and walked out with justice served cold as Wyoming winter. The Garand sat cleaned and ready in its case, waiting patiently for the next time someone needed to be reminded that true skill couldn't be purchased, only earned. And Clara Reed, daughter of ghosts, keeper of silence, guardian of a legend that would outlive them all, smiled in the darkness and knew that some victories echoed forever. Her work had spoken. The world had listened. And in the end, that was all the conversation she'd ever needed to have. The ghost had returned, proven her point, and earned the right to disappear again, this time on her own terms, with her own legacy secured and her father's memory finally completely vindicated. No apologies, no explanations, just 10 shots and a truth that couldn't be denied. That's how legends are born, Not in spotlights, but in silence, measured not by words, but by results that speak for themselves across time and distance and the endless chatter of those who confuse. Noise with meaning. Clara Reed had become immortal the moment she pulled that trigger for the 10th time. Everything afterward was just the world catching up to what she'd already proven. The Silverwood Elite range still operates today, but with new management, new policies, and a bronze plaque by the entrance that reads, "Excellence knows no uniform." Skill recognizes no boundaries. Respect is earned through performance, not pedigree. Below it, in smaller text, "In memory of James Reed, and in honor of all who serve in silence." Clara Reed has never returned to Silverwood. She doesn't need to. Her 10 shots echo there still, a permanent reminder that some truths can't be bought, some legends can't be manufactured, and some people will always let their work speak louder than their words. The Garand rests ready, the ghost endures. The legend lives. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.